Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a really fascinating case study. We're going to unpack the mechanics, the math, and honestly, the psychology behind a decade-long investment journey. We'll be looking at exactly how everyday, hard-earned savings can actually build a dream life. Okay, let's just dive right into this. Our story kicks off way back in 1998 with a guy named Stefan George. Now, at the time, Stefan was a 25-year-old working in the GCC. And look, like a lot of young professionals just starting out, he didn't have some massive trust fund or a lucky inheritance. He just had his salary. But painstakingly, he managed to scrape together a very modest starting capital. We're talking less than 5,000 US dollars.
And seeing a starting number that small naturally leads us to a question pretty much all of us wrestle with at some point. Is a tiny nest egg like that actually enough to hit huge real-world milestones? People always say it takes money to make money, but as you'll see in this story, having strategic timing and a ton of patience can multiply a really modest start into something completely life-changing.
All right, Section 1. The 1998 Currency Opportunity, Capitalizing on External Pressures.
So, let's set the scene. Back in 1998, India was dealing with some serious pressure on its foreign exchange reserves and overall external balances. To stop the bleeding, banks leaned heavily on something called FCNR deposits. That stands for Foreign Currency Non-Resident Accounts. Basically, the strategy was to aggressively court foreign currency inflows from Indian citizens working abroad. Long story short, they needed US dollars and they needed them fast.
To give folks like Stefan to bite, the banks threw out an offer that sounds almost crazy today. An absolutely incredible guaranteed return of nearly 8% a year. And here is the kicker. That wasn't in local currency. That 8% was in US dollars. In the world of relatively safe bank deposits, finding an 8% guaranteed return in a major global currency is just a massive, rare opportunity.
Moving on to Section 2, Strategic Exits and Life Goals, Holding Patiently Through Economic Cycles.
Recognizing how good this was, Stefan locked in his savings in 1998 at an exchange rate of about 38 rupees per US dollar. And then, well, he just waited. He patiently held that position through multiple economic cycles. If we map out his timeline, it's basically a decade-long hold with two very strategic exits. First up, in 2004, he sold half of his deposits at 43 rupees to the dollar to fund building his family home. Then, 4 years later, in 2008, he sold the rest at 40 rupees to the dollar to buy a plot of land.
Now, you're probably wondering, why exit then? Well, the macroeconomic environment had totally shifted. Those amazing 8% FCNR interest rates eventually tanked down to just 2 or 3%. Because of that, the whole risk-reward equation changed, which pushed him to smartly move his capital out of those deposits and into other long-term assets that made more sense.
Which brings us to Section 3, the missed millions, the twist in the investment tale.
Okay, here's where things get pretty wild. Stefan exited in the low 40s, right? But the years that followed tell a crazy story. The US dollar absolutely skyrocketed against the rupee, eventually hitting 69, 70, and even higher. Just mathematically speaking, if he had just held on to his entire initial investment, his financial gains would have been exponentially larger. On paper, he left a lot of money on the table.
Staring at that massive spread between his early exits and those eventual peaks, you'd probably assume he kicks himself over the timing. But he doesn't, at all. Stefan is actually super adamant about it, saying, quote, "However, I do not consider those decisions mistakes." And honestly, his logic is brilliant because it's so simple. The investment did exactly what it was supposed to do. It completely funded his two biggest life goals, building a family home and purchasing a valuable piece of land. That money wasn't just imaginary numbers ticking up on a screen. It translated directly into tangible things that improved his real life.
Let's look at Section 4, Core Lessons in Wealth Creation, Translating a Decade of Investing.
So, what can we take away from this? First off, it absolutely proves you don't need a huge windfall to start building wealth. Also, if you pay attention, times of economic pressure often create these golden windows with really attractive interest rates. Add in the multiplier effect of currency movements and your returns can seriously take off. But you can't just set it and forget it. As the market evolves, your asset allocation has to evolve too. And above all else, your portfolio should serve your life goals, not the other way around.
Finally, Section 5, Forecasting the US dollar, Future Opportunities in Volatile Markets.
Fast forward to today's landscape. Think about the geopolitical tensions we're seeing, the crazy volatility in the energy markets, the shifting monetary policies. Stefan points out that similar currency opportunities are forming right now. Looking at historical currency cycles and inflation data, he believes we are watching history rhyme once again.
So where does he see the US dollar against the Indian rupee heading next? Well, over the next 5 years, he's projecting the exchange rate to hit anywhere from 105 to 120 rupees. And over the next decade, try an incredible 140 to 160 rupees to the dollar. Obviously, these are his personal forecasts based on long-term trends, but it really highlights the massive, ongoing power of currency movements if you're positioned right.
Ultimately, all of his foresight into the markets is anchored by this incredibly grounded philosophy. Patience creates wealth. Discipline preserves it. Life goals give it meaning. You build wealth by sitting through the boring stretches, you keep it by not making reckless emotional pivots, but you only truly validate it by how you use it to elevate your life.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to take a hard look at your own portfolio. Ask yourself, are you just investing to endlessly accumulate wealth, or are you investing to give it actual meaning? Knowing exactly what that money is for is probably the greatest edge you can have. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep learning.